What are your creepiest true stories that still can't be explained? I was home alone with my sister, who was about 3 at the time. She was asleep in my room while I stepped out to use the bathroom. No one else was in the house, but while I was in there, I started hearing the chairs moving in the kitchen. When I came out and looked to my left, one of the dining chairs had been moved and was now perfectly positioned, facing straight down the hallway. I went back to check on my sister, and she was still sound asleep. I walked around the house to see if my parents had come home, but there was no one there. All the doors and windows were shut. There was no way wind could have pushed that chair 5 feet and turned it to face the hall. Around that time, I was also being woken up at 3 in the morning almost every night, feeling a cold hand resting on my left chest, right over my heart. Story 2. I have an aunt whose house is supposedly haunted. It used to be a funeral home before another family turned it into a regular house while farming the surrounding cornfield. An elderly woman once passed away after tripping down the stairs. Several members of my family have seen strange things there, especially around the stairs and the upstairs living room, which seem to be hot spots. My aunt is used to it by now, but my mother was completely freaked out when she saw what she thought was my cousin running up the stairs. She yelled at her not to run, and a moment later, my cousin popped out of the downstairs living room, asking what was wrong. Personal anecdotes like this are highly fallible and prone to misperception. I don't expect anyone to believe me about the things I've seen. I once saw an orb too large to be just dust, and it didn't move the way glare usually does when your eyes shift. But there's always a natural explanation. Maybe it was a large bug catching the light from a lamp, and I simply lost track of it. The more interesting event happened when my cousin was feeling particularly uneasy in her room, which sits directly beneath the upstairs living room where most of the activity occurs, including that orb. I'm interested in these things from a scientific perspective, so I offered to sit in there with her to see if we could observe anything unusual. We went in, and after a while, I asked if there was anything to do. Nothing happened at first. I sat on the bed with my back against the wall, talking with my cousin for a bit. Then there were 2 knocks on the wall right behind me. I even felt the vibration. We both jumped up and checked the adjacent room, thinking someone from the family might be playing a prank on us. But no one was there. They were all on the other side of the house. Maybe it was the pipes. My cousin thought I had knocked on the wall, but I hadn't. So we went back to see if anything else would happen. After a while, my aunt came in to check on us. And just as she walked through the door, a distinct canine growl sounded from the center of the room. Both of their eyes went wide. I was still processing what I'd heard and asked if they both heard it too. My aunt raised an eyebrow and said, "Yeah, the last family had a dog." I don't know what that was. The obvious explanation of ghosts is there, but science depends on verifiable, repeatable evidence. Theories are only useful if they have predictive power, and almost every attempt to prompt so-called ghost activity either fails or has an existing explanation that can't fully be separated from the event, like the bug or the pipes. But that growl was strange. 3 of us, standing in different spots, all heard it coming from the center of the room. I can't think of any explanation other than that a sound like a dog's growl somehow spontaneously originated from that point, or we all experienced a simultaneous auditory hallucination. Story 3. We were staying in France with a family friend's family. He spoke French, but the rest of us didn't. The guest bedroom was big, with 2 double beds placed along adjoining walls. I have 3 brothers, and since we were all young, the 4 of us shared those 2 beds. One night, I woke up and saw a woman in a pink dress sitting in a chair next to the opposite bed. She was knitting, quietly. Beside her stood a man in a brown suit, one arm resting on her shoulder. Then the woman suddenly stopped knitting, turned to look at me, and ran straight toward me. I blinked, and they were gone. Now, there were no pictures in the house of anyone wearing those clothes. I didn't know who they were or why they'd appeared. Later, we were told through the friend that the room had belonged to his grandparents. She used to sit in that exact spot to knit. They were buried in a pink dress and a brown suit. I don't believe in ghosts, but I have no rational explanation for what I saw. I saw another ghostly figure the following year while on holiday, and I still can't explain that one either. Story 4. I was outside talking to my neighbor when, all of a sudden, it was like someone accidentally flicked the lights off and then back on again. It went completely dark in the middle of the day for just a split second. At first, I thought it was just my brain playing tricks on me, until I saw the confused look on my neighbor's face. Then her daughter spoke up, asking, "What just happened?" We'd all been facing different directions, so it wasn't like a shadow or passing cloud. It was dark everywhere, all at once. We still talk about it sometimes, and we still have no idea what it was. I've spent hours on the internet trying to find an explanation, but I haven't found anything that fits. It definitely wasn't an eclipse, and it wasn't anything like one. The darkness only lasted for the blink of an eye. Some people have suggested it could have been a plane's shadow, which was my first thought too. But when I looked into it, I learned that planes usually fly too high to cast a visible shadow on the ground. I'm not saying it's impossible that it was a plane, but at the time I researched it extensively and came to the conclusion that it probably wasn't. It's been too long now for me to remember every detail of how I got there. I'm a very scientific person. I've literally been trained in how to research, and I don't believe in anything remotely supernatural. I'm just sharing what happened, and the fact that even after looking into it carefully, I never reached a solid conclusion. Story 5. I'm pretty sure I lived in a haunted house, or maybe someone in my family was haunted. One day during my teens, I came home after a miserable day. I didn't have my keys, so I knocked for my sister to let me in. When she opened the door, her eyes were wide with panic. "Did you just get home?" she asked. "Yeah, just now." "Why?" I said. She started shaking like she was trying to get spiders off her and said she'd been hearing my voice coming from my room, telling her to come in. "I haven't been home all day," I told her. "Did you go into my room?" She shook her head and said, "No, it was your voice, but it sounded quietly malicious. It just felt off." Then she called her boyfriend to pick her up and stayed with him overnight, leaving me in that creepy house alone. I didn't hear anything that night though, and eventually we just forgot about it. Story 6. My parents' two-story house had a living room that connected to the staircase leading upstairs. From the couch, you could see straight down the second-floor hallway. One time, while my family was away on vacation, I invited my cousin over to keep me company while I house sat. I'd been alone in that house for a couple of days and just really needed someone around. We were sitting on the couch playing Xbox or something like that. The stairs leading to the second floor were just barely in my peripheral vision. At the top of the stairs on the left was a doorway to the bathroom and nothing else. We were up pretty late gaming when out of the corner of my eye, I saw a gray face lean out and stare at me for a split second. I didn't move, I just barely registered it before it was gone. The moment my cousin said that, my heart sank. It terrified me to have him basically confirm what I'd just seen, even though I tried to brush it off. I had assumed it was just one of those quick blurs or darting shadows you catch in your peripheral vision sometimes. The creepiest part was how it moved. It slid out as if it were lying on the floor. Its head was level with the top step right at the bottom of the bathroom doorway. It just slid out, stared for a second, then slid back. From what we both described, it looked gray-skinned with black hair. We went upstairs right after and checked the whole bathroom, even inside the luggage bags in the closet. We didn't find anything. To this day, I still can't stand having any door in my house open. I'm always afraid I'll look down a hallway and see some gray-skinned thing lean halfway out, staring silently before vanishing. At the time, we tried convincing ourselves it was a raccoon or something, using that excuse to justify checking the bathroom. We both knew it was a lie, but honestly, we would have felt safer getting attacked by a raccoon. That's why we searched every single bag in the closet. Whatever it was, we were cornered in that bathroom with nowhere for it to go. Yet somehow it disappeared without a trace. Story 7. This happened about 5 years ago. I was asleep in my room when my eyes suddenly opened around 2:30 a.m. I was wide awake like my body had flipped a switch. My senses felt razor sharp, and I got that unmistakable feeling that someone or something was in the room with me. In the dark, I saw the outline of something under my desk. It looked like a man, but tiny, maybe a foot tall at most. I stared at it, completely confused, but not exactly scared yet. Then it started to move. Slowly, it crawled out from under the desk and began to cross the room toward my bed. The light switch was right beside me. I decided that in one motion, I'd flick it on and jump on this thing the second it got close. It reached the side of my bed, and that's when I panicked. I fumbled the light switch and missed my chance, but I swear I saw it keep moving right through my bedroom wall. I just sat there on my bed, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Now, my brother's room was right next to mine, the same wall that thing disappeared through. About 10 minutes later, I hear a knock on my door. My brother walks in looking uneasy, and the first thing out of his mouth is, "Did you happen to see, like, a little tiny human in here a minute ago?" I just stared at him. My heart dropped. I told him I had. He said, "Well, I just watched something dart across my room. It looked like it came straight out of the wall and then it vanished through the opposite wall and outside." To say I was stunned would be an understatement, but honestly, I was relieved. At least I knew I hadn't hallucinated it. About a year later, I was driving late at night, listening to this AM radio show, one of those where people call in with strange experiences. The guest starts describing something that happened to him, and it was almost identical to what my brother and I had seen. One of my paternal great-grandparents claimed to have seen a little man, and the story was passed down. This would have been in very rural Wales in the early 1900s. The house they lived in had a small dairy attached, and the entry door was split into two parts, with the lower part pinned back to stay open. One day while working there, they saw a little man hurry across the room and through the open lower door. He was apparently very smartly dressed in a little waistcoat. Story 8. I was walking to my friend's house one summer when I was about 10 or 11 years old. It was a sunny day with a few scattered clouds, bright and clear, perfect visibility. Then, out of nowhere, a perfectly rectangular shadow came up from behind me on the ground. It was maybe 15 by 30 feet in size, moving just a little faster than a car would. I watched it pass over me, puzzled, then looked up, but there was nothing in the sky that could have cast it. Even the clouds were just thin, wispy trails. When I looked back down, I saw the shadows sliding over some houses before it disappeared completely. I never saw anything like it again. Story 9. When I was 7 months pregnant with my first child, my granddad, the man who helped raise me, passed away. My daughter never got the chance to meet him, and I rarely spoke about him because it was too painful. When she was a baby, she would often wave and smile toward the hallway while sitting on my bed. I thought she was just looking at sunlight flickering on the wall, but she'd always wave and giggle at the same spot, no matter where we were in the house. When she became a toddler, she'd sometimes say things like, "No, sorry, I can't play now, I have to eat my brekkie," or "Haha, you're making me laugh." When I asked who she was talking to, she'd simply say, "The nice man." I just assumed she meant an imaginary friend. It only happened once in a while, maybe once a month. When my daughter was 2, I had another baby, and my mom came to stay with us for a while. My older daughter started talking to this man every morning at breakfast, always facing the hallway where the sunlight streamed in. I heard her telling him all about her new little sister. My mom thought it was adorable and asked her who she was talking to. I expected her to say "the nice man" like she always did, but instead she looked my mom straight in the eye, pointed at her and said, "It's your daddy, Nana. Say hi." My mom dropped the cup of tea she was making and just stood there, speechless, and I was the same. Like I said, I don't really believe in ghosts, but my daughter had never met him and I'd only ever referred to him as my granddad. There's no way my toddler could have known he was my mom's father. My mom's eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "Can you tell him I said hi back?" My daughter simply said, "Okay," and went right back to eating her cereal. It was so eerie, I'll never forget it. She's 4 now, and she still sometimes says hi to the nice man in the hallway whenever the sunlight shines through. Story 10. One night, when I was about 16, I swear I glitched into the Matrix or something. I'd finally decided to get off my computer and go to bed, around 2 in the morning if I remember right. At the time, my family and I lived in a decent 2-story house. The staircase to the second floor was simple. Go up a few steps, turn on the landing halfway, climb the rest, and just a few steps later, you'd reach my bedroom door. But that night, I somehow got lost on that same staircase. It was dark, sure, but still, how do you get lost on stairs you've climbed 1,000 times? I kept one hand on the railing like always, but for some reason, it felt like I couldn't find the top. I swear that as soon as I reached the landing, I spent about 10 minutes just walking upward. Realistically, it only takes around 5 to 7 seconds to climb those stairs, 3 if you're running or skipping steps. But I realized I'd been walking for much longer than that. I stopped and instantly felt uneasy. I'd gone up those stairs in pitch darkness countless times before, but this time, even with my hand on the railing, I was getting nowhere, just endlessly walking upward. My skin crawled. If my brother hadn't turned on the upstairs hallway light, I'm not sure I would have made it to my bedroom. He blinked sleepily at me and asked if I was okay, and all I could say was, "I legitimately have no idea." The next day, I told him what had happened, and he said the only reason he came out of his room was because he'd heard footsteps on the stairs for several minutes. I wasn't so tired that I'd just been wandering up and down the stairs. I was fully awake, and at no point did it ever feel like I'd turned around or started heading back down. I still get chills thinking about it. Story 11. I've never had any psychic abilities. I've never seen a ghost. I'm not even particularly good at reading body language. So imagine my surprise when this happened. I was about 25, working nights as a bartender, and got home around 2:30 in the morning. I hated smelling like stale beer, so I always took a shower before bed. That night, I sat down on the edge of my bed to take off my shoes. I was sitting upright, not lying down or even reclining. I didn't close my eyes or start to drift off. Then, without any warning, I was suddenly somewhere else, inside another person's mind, or body, or memory. I was walking down a long hallway, more like a corridor with harsh fluorescent lights flickering overhead. A police officer was beside me, escorting me. He was in uniform, not a suit or tie. When we reached the end of the hallway, we turned right and pushed through a set of double doors. We stepped into a morgue. A doctor was there, standing beside a single body covered by a white sheet. The room was lined with stainless steel tables and medical equipment, but that was the only body. The lighting was awful, sickly, almost greenish yellow, casting everything in a queasy tone. No one said a word, but somehow I knew I was there to identify the body. The doctor pulled the sheet down, revealing a young man between 20 and 25. Somehow I knew this young man was my son. I started screaming my head off, hitting the cop with my purse and trying to hit the doctor. I shouted that it was their fault my son was dead. The doctor wrapped his arms around me from behind, like a bear hug. Then it was over. The whole thing lasted less than 90 seconds. When I came back to myself, I was sitting in the same position on my bed, shoes still on. My heart was racing. My throat was sore from screaming, but I hadn't made a sound. I never woke my roommates. I have never experienced anything like that before or since. I didn't sleep for 2 days. I don't know who the woman was, the body I was inhabiting. I don't know if I saw her past, her present, or her future. But it felt like I was an intruder, witnessing something that wasn't mine to see. I'm fairly certain it wasn't my future. I'm now 38, married to a man of a different race than mine, and different from the son I saw at the table, and we're trying to have our first child. Also, if I ever see that person in real life, I will either run screaming or pass out. Story 12. My wife and I went camping near a desert ghost town. It was a weekday, so the place was empty except for the rangers who stopped by in the evenings to collect fees. Toward sunset, a guy in a van showed up and decided to camp right next to us. There was an entire open area, yet he chose to be practically beside our site. That night, while we sat around our campfire, he stayed in his van with the back door slightly open, just sitting there watching. We made a point of noticing him but tried to ignore it and enjoy our evening. Later that night, while we were asleep, I started hearing footsteps circling our tent. I jolted awake and sat up suddenly, and my wife did the same. As soon as we sat up, the footsteps stopped. We sat there in silence, waiting for them to start again. An hour passed. Nothing. Finally, I worked up the courage to get out of the tent and look around. No one was there, but the van was still parked at the other campsite. So we went back to bed. The next morning, the van was gone. What made it worse was seeing footprints all around our tent, prints that didn't match ours. Ever since that night, I've carried one on every camping trip. Story 13. I suppose it was just a coincidence, but when I was little, I used to go outside every morning to pet a cat that lived under my house. I played with her every day. One night, I dreamed that she had passed away. I woke up upset, went to our usual spot, and called for her. She never came out, and I never saw her again after that dream. When I was about 11, we took in a dog from an elderly person. He wasn't in the best health, but we were meant to be his final happy home, out in the middle of nowhere. We had him for about a year when, one winter night, I randomly decided to go outside to sit with him. I lay beside him for about an hour, even though it was a cold night. He refused to go indoors, so we kept a space heater in a sheltered spot where he liked to lie down. I don't know what made me say it, but before I went inside, I gave him a big hug and told him it was okay to go. The next morning, my mom woke me to tell me he had passed away during the night. I helped her move his body to a sheltered spot so his owner could come say their final goodbye. I still don't understand how I knew, but I think I just felt his pain and wanted him to know it was okay to let go, that he didn't have to keep living for us. Story 14. I was at home with my mom. No one else was there. Our house had only 2 entrances, one at the front, where I was sitting, and one at the back, which led straight into the kitchen where my mom was. Then I clearly heard my dad's voice calling out from the living room. He was at work at the time, but I went to check anyway, and found my mom there. She looked at me and asked, "Did you hear that too?" Nobody was there. When my dad came home, we asked him about it, but of course, he said it wasn't him. At first, I thought he was lying. He loved to prank us, but there was no way he could have snuck in without either of us noticing. Story 15. I was staying at my parents' house for the weekend and woke up one morning with the urge to look up old classmates on Facebook. There was this girl I'd liked back in band class, a grade below me, friends with my brother's friends, but I'd never actually talked to her. I decided to look her up along with a few others, just to see what they were up to now. We'd gone to a big suburban high school, and I hadn't thought about her in years, but only a few minutes after I'd viewed her page, the phone at my parents' house rang. I got up lazily to check if it was my parents or my brother calling. When I picked up the phone and looked at the caller ID, I froze. Her name was on the screen. Immediately, I started thinking I'd somehow triggered something on her Facebook page. Maybe I'd accidentally liked an old post or done something that alerted her I was creeping, and now she was calling me. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I double-checked the number on the caller ID against her Facebook, and sure enough, it matched. I just sat there, stunned, trying to make sense of how something that unlikely could happen. A little later, my brother came by, and I told him who had called. He actually had her number saved in his phone, so he texted her to ask why she'd called our parents' house. She replied that she hadn't. Apparently, it was just an accidental butt dial. Story 16. When I was about 9 or 10, I used to play football with my friends every weekend. One day, this guy, probably around 18 or 19, showed up out of nowhere and joined us. He was wearing a karate uniform and didn't seem to know how to play, so he just kept throwing karate kicks everywhere instead. It was such a random thing, but for some reason, I never forgot his face. Fast forward about 15 years, I'm in college, walking across campus. When I see that same karate guy, I recognized him instantly. A week later, my girlfriend and I took a trip to a city about 3 hours from home. We were walking around when I saw him again, sitting in the grass by a park, kissing another guy. I thought it was strange and told my girlfriend, but she brushed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination. The next week, my family and I went on our annual beach vacation, about 2 hours away by plane. One night, my cousins and I went to a bar party, and at some point, I stepped outside for a smoke. As I opened the door, guess who walked in at that exact moment? The karate guy. Our eyes met for about 3 seconds. He didn't seem to recognize me, but I was completely stunned to see him again. I called my girlfriend at 3 in the morning to tell her, and she thought I was losing my mind. I know coincidences happen, but to me, it felt like a glitch in the Matrix. I've since moved to another continent. If I ever see that guy again, I swear I'll lose it. Story 17. 2 days after one of my closest friends passed away, I fell asleep in the library at school. We'd been somewhat prepared. He'd been in a terrible accident, but it still hit me hard. After days of trying to process everything while running on almost no sleep, I finally put my head down on my arms at a library desk. When I woke up, he was sitting right beside me. It felt so natural, just like old times. We'd spent countless hours studying and joking in that same library, so nothing about it seemed strange. We stood up and wandered around together, watching a librarian shelve books. A girl sat on the floor reading, wearing ridiculously bright yellow socks, and he cracked a few dad jokes about them being too loud for the library. I woke up, and he was gone. I was startled, but at the same time, I felt this strange sense of peace. I got up and walked through the same section of shelves, and froze. The same librarian was there, putting books away, and the same girl in the bright yellow socks was still sitting on the floor reading. To this day, I swear I hadn't seen them before I fell asleep. I like to think it was his way of saying goodbye. It brought me so much comfort, even if it was just a dream, but those socks, I'll never forget them. Every time I see a loud pair of yellow socks, I think of him and that final chat we shared. Story 18. When I was little, my dad would sometimes sleep with me in my bed. Nothing weird, sometimes my sister or I would be scared after seeing a horror movie or something and we'd end up in my parents' bed. As we got older, it became more inconvenient, especially for my mom, who would always end up in the middle, between my dad and either my sister or me, or both. Eventually, my dad would just sleep with me instead. This stopped around age 10, which was when my grandfather passed away. Fast forward to when I was about 13 or 14. One Saturday, we all went to sleep, but my dad stayed up drinking a few beers and listening to his old vinyls. I woke up in the middle of the night, or maybe early morning, I'm not sure, and felt trapped between my blankets and a body next to me, much heavier than mine. I was wedged between that body and the wall, unable to move or pull the blanket away. In the morning, I woke up and he was still there, sleeping under the blankets, or so I thought. I could feel the weight beside me. I was very skinny back then, so the dip in the mattress, the volume under the blankets, the warmth, and even the faint sound of breathing, almost like snoring, were all unmistakable. I went downstairs, and as I approached the kitchen, I saw my mom and my dad standing there with him casually making a cup of coffee. My stomach dropped. I immediately ran back upstairs to my room, but there was nothing on my bed. No body, no sign of anyone ever having been there, not even the blankets pulled up the way they usually are when you wake up and push them aside. They were completely flat, except for the slight lift on my side of the bed, the one next to the wall. I was literally in tears, trying to make sense of what had happened. I could understand if in the middle of the night I'd dreamed or imagined that someone was there while half asleep, but in the morning I was fully awake. I'd gone through all that effort, slipping out through the foot of the bed so I wouldn't wake him, still feeling the weight beside me, the breathing, everything. I even stood up and looked back, and the blankets weren't flat. There was definitely a body under them. I'll admit, I never actually saw any part of his body, but it was winter, and he always slept covered from head to toe, and that's exactly what I saw, someone completely covered from head to toe. I was terrified, but I couldn't bring myself to ask him or tell my parents what had happened. If he told me he hadn't slept in my room, I would have completely freaked out. So at first, I convinced myself it really had been him, that he'd just woken up before me and left the imprint of his body under the blankets. But as the years went by, that explanation made less and less sense, so I eventually tried to forget about it. Then, many years later, I walked into my parents' room and saw him sleeping the same way, covered from head to toe, and it unlocked that memory instantly. Ever since, I've thought about it often. I've even tried crushing my own blankets to see if I could recreate that shape, but no matter what I do, there's just no way to make it look like there's a body under them. Story 19. I used to think this kind of experience was something supernatural, like deja vu, or that strange feeling when everything happening seems to have already occurred in a dream, until I experienced it while on DXM a few times about 10 years ago. The first time it happened, I'd taken an entire box of quercetin and then took a hit off a bong that was way too big at my friend's house. We were watching Evil Bong, which I'd never seen before. Suddenly, I felt trapped in what seemed like a perpetual time loop, where everything happening had already happened. It lasted for at least 30 to 45 minutes. I started to panic, convinced my friends were pulling some kind of cruel prank on me, but they had no idea what I was talking about. I got so scared that I texted my dad in a panic. He came home from a night out with his buddies to comfort me and told me stories about times he'd gotten too messed up. He'd never experienced what I was going through, but he had some great stories. It happened to me a few more times after that. I was in a really dark, rough patch back then and had a serious problem with DXM. It never scared me as much as that first time though, because I eventually recognized it for what it was, a trick of the brain, a kind of perpetual deja vu. I remember reading an article on Cracked around that time that mentioned a mental illness where people actually live with constant deja vu, no substances involved. Most of them end up taking their own lives. I don't blame them, honestly. Deja vu can be fascinating when it happens once in a while, but to experience nothing else, to live trapped in that feeling, sounds like an unbearably miserable existence. Story 20. One night, I started having a panic attack out of nowhere. I kept repeating, "Something's wrong. I do have anxiety, but I'd only ever had one other panic attack before this." My husband sat on the bed with me, and we tried to figure out what could have triggered it. The only thing we could come up with was that a family member of mine was leaving on a trip the next day, and maybe that was making me nervous. So I came up with an excuse to drop off some coffee before they left early that morning. When I saw them, I felt completely fine. I immediately knew it wasn't connected, wished them well, and drove home. About an hour later, I got a call that a relative on the other side of the country had passed away the night before. My cousin had ended her life. Her husband had passed away from an undiagnosed medical condition a year earlier. Both of them were gone in their early 30s. The night before she died, I had a dream where my late grandma was at a family gathering at my late aunt's house. We were all in a room, talking and laughing like everything was normal. I saw my cousin and her husband sitting together on the couch. My grandma turned to me and said that he was already with her, but my cousin would be joining them soon. I woke up and told my husband that I was worried about my cousin, but I brushed it off as just a dream. Later, I found out she had passed around the same time I'd had that dream. Story 21. When I was about 10 years old, I woke up one morning with no memory of the day before. I told my little brother, and he said he had the same problem. I didn't believe him though. He was 8 and thought it was funny, while I was genuinely concerned. I think he treated it like we were playing some kind of pretend game. Of course, that made my parents think it was just a game, so no one took me seriously. All I wanted was for someone to tell me something, anything about yesterday to help jog my memory, but no one did. I still have no idea what happened. That was more than 30 years ago, and I'm the only one who remembers not remembering. The same thing happened to me. In 5th grade, we were working on a project where we had to write a letter to our favorite author. That night, I was planning what I wanted to include in my letter before going to bed. When I woke up and went to school though, the letters were already completed, as if an entire day had passed without me noticing. I was so disappointed. When I asked my friend what I had written about, they told me it was similar to what I had been planning the day before. I still don't know what happened, but I think about that missing day to this day. Story 22. When I was 9 years old, my best friend and I were crossing a busy street on our way home from school. Normally we were careful, but I was distracted by a black cat that had been following us down the road. We stopped and she bent down to pet him while I turned to cross the street, forgetting to look both ways. A silver car was right beside me, about to hit me. I froze, completely paralyzed like a deer in headlights. My friend screamed. Then in an instant, the car was on my left. It hadn't swerved, and there was no other lane. It was just suddenly on the other side, speeding away. I ran across the rest of the road, and my friend asked how I'd gotten past the car. Everything looked slightly off. Her outline seemed fuzzy, doubled somehow. The sky was bright and sunny, even though it had been overcast and windy on the other side of the road. When I looked back, the black cat was still there, staring at me from across the street. Then he turned and calmly walked away. I know it must have been an optical illusion, and I probably missed the car by a fraction of a second and was just shaken afterward, but I thought about that moment for years. Story 23. My husband worked at a small nursing home with only 3 residents, run by his aunt. I had college classes nearby and often stopped by for a few hours at the end of his shift to visit with the residents. One night, after my husband had helped the residents to bed, he went downstairs to collect his paycheck while I turned off the lights. As I reached the top of the stairs, I glanced down the hallway leading to the residents' rooms. Standing outside one of the doors was a woman in a pale green Victorian-style dress, her ear pressed against the door. I opened my mouth to say something, but she turned, looked directly at me, put a finger to her lips, and shushed me. I turned and nearly fell down the stairs. When I reached the owner's office, she took one look at my face and said, "You saw the woman in green." It wasn't a question. I nodded, and she asked whose room the woman had been standing outside. When I told her, she simply nodded and sighed. The next morning, the owner called to tell us that the resident in that room had been found comatose in her bed. She passed away later that day. Story 24. I was about 18 or 19 years old, working an hour away from home. 2 bus rides, a train ride, and then a 15-minute walk. Since I worked in a lawyer's office, I always brought sneakers to walk in instead of my work shoes. One morning, I got up, took off my watch, and had a shower as usual. When I got out, my watch was gone. I searched everywhere, pulled everything out of the bathroom cabinets, but couldn't find it. Eventually, I gave up and went about my day. When I got to work, I told my boss I'd lost my watch and was paranoid I'd be late because of it. He looked up and said, "It's in your right Adidas." He followed me to my desk, and sure enough, my watch was in my sneaker, the same one I'd just worn through 2 bus rides, a train ride, and a 15-minute walk. I still have no idea how it got there, or how my boss knew. He said he didn't know why he'd said it. It just came out before he could think. Story 25. I was 15 years old, taking a shower at home while the rest of my family was out. It was around 9:30 at night. As I was showering, I heard someone knock on the bathroom door. Thinking it was my dad or one of my brothers getting home, I called out, "I'll be out in a sec." There was silence for a few moments, and then the knocking started again. Only this time it was pounding, like someone was trying to break the door down with their fists. It was unsettling, but my dad loved to prank us, so I didn't think much of it. I wrapped a towel around myself and swung the door open to see what his problem was. But no one was there. The house was completely locked up. No open windows, no cars in the driveway. I checked every floor, every room, but no one else was home. That was the first time it happened. The strange occurrences continued in smaller ways until we eventually moved out, and they became so frequent that we started joking it was a poltergeist. We even gave it a name, Edgar. Story 26. I was walking to a train station in The Hague at 4 in the morning to catch a flight. I was already on edge when I noticed a man across the street heading in my direction. He crossed the road and started walking beside me. Normally, that would have set off every alarm bell in my head, but for some reason it didn't. He asked, in English, if I was American. I told him I was Italian, though I'm actually American. We ended up having a full conversation in Italian all the way to the train station. When we arrived, I said something like, "Thank you, and I hope you have a safe trip," then went inside. I turned around to ask him a question and realized he hadn't come into the station with me. I stepped back outside, but he was gone. This particular train station had no nearby buildings, no alleys, nowhere for anyone to disappear without being seen, especially in the few seconds since we'd parted. I walked around for a while scanning the area, but there was no trace of him. I'm not a particularly religious person, but one habit from my childhood has stuck with me, saying a quick prayer for a safe journey before a long trip. That morning, feeling unusually nervous, I'd said one, and not 2 minutes later, the man appeared. Story 27. I was out one night helping my friend with a filming project for his class. We were shooting around an old, rundown shed that was sometimes used by homeless people, perfect for the horror theme he was going for. There were 4 of us in total, all about 17 or 18 years old. Since we were in the middle of the woods at night, I wasn't sure how long we'd be out there, so I brought a drink, some snacks, and this odd little gadget, a combined radio and flashlight. The radio part had never worked, not even when it was brand new, but the flashlight was decent, and it was the only one I had, so I packed it anyway. I met up with the others, and we trudged through the woods toward the old shed. We'd been walking for about half an hour when I realized how unnervingly quiet it was. No wind, no insects, no rustling, just our voices. When we finally reached the shed and started setting up, one of the guys commented on how silent everything was. And then, out of nowhere, we heard what sounded like a pig squealing high-pitched and close. At that exact moment, the radio on my torch, which had never worked before, suddenly blasted to life at full volume. It was nothing but static mixed with what sounded like a foreign language for about 10 seconds, and then it cut off. Silence again. We filmed what we needed as fast as we could and got out of there. I never managed to get that radio to turn on again, and I eventually lost the torch. But what still freaks me out most was how impossibly quiet it was that night. Story 28. A few years ago, a schoolmate of mine took his own life. That same evening, I was at home playing computer games on the couch. I started feeling tired and decided to take a nap. In my dream, that schoolmate was there, talking to me in a friendly way. He said he'd seen me around school but had never spoken to me before. We weren't friends. I'd never exchanged a single word with him, and there were more than 400 students at my school, so his sudden appearance in my dream that night was strange to say the least. Anyway, I woke up from that dream, didn't think much of it, and went back to playing my game. The next day at recess, I overheard a group of friends saying that John had taken his own life the day before. The canteen was noisy, and I misheard the name as Ethan, which confused me since I didn't think there was anyone by that name at our school. But even before I realized my mistake, the first person who came to mind was John. Yes, I'd dreamed about him the night before, but I hadn't thought much of it, and by then I'd already forgotten most of the dream. When my friend corrected me, confirming that it was indeed John, a wave of goosebumps went through me. I later found out that John had died that same evening around the time I'd been taking my nap. That dream remains the only interaction I ever had with him. Story 29. In 2011, I was doing the classic post-college backpack through Europe thing. I made it to Oslo in early June with my backpack, some clothes, a laptop, a wallet with a credit and debit card, and a €20 bill. I went to the main train station to buy a pass, but it didn't recognize my card. I Skyped my dad to call the bank. Nothing wrong on their end. I exchanged my €20 for kroner and bought a bus ticket to my hostel, at least securing a bed and food. I tried running my card there, still no luck. The employee mentioned that the banks were going on strike at midnight. I walked across the street to a gas station, still nothing. The hostel let me check in and go to my room, but I was starting to panic. How was I going to survive a week in this incredibly expensive country with no money at all? A local woman showed up in my room and offered a deal. If I let her borrow my laptop to apply for a job, she'd take me to an ATM in town. I agreed. We walked to the grocery store, but they weren't giving out cash that night. There was an ATM across the street, but it had a sign saying it was out of service as well. No worries, she knew of another one a bit farther away, though it wouldn't be as popular. We walked 3 miles along back roads and trails. I spent the time wondering if this was how I'd disappear, while she chatted about horses. Suddenly, we emerged at a random Norwegian suburban mall with an ATM and a line. This ATM actually accepted my card, and I withdrew enough cash to last the week. We then walked the 3 miles back, returning to the hostel around 11:30 at night in the last glow of Norwegian summer twilight. The next morning, the woman was gone. The bank strike had been called off, and my card worked everywhere I tried it for the rest of the week, even at the main train station. It wasn't supernatural or anything, but I still wonder, what was she doing at that hostel? How did she know the way to a mall, 3 miles away, pre-smartphone, no GPS, and why did my cards suddenly start working? Or maybe the better question is, why weren't they working before? Story 30. 2 days ago, I was working as a night receptionist at a hotel. A man came in asking for a room. Neat my height and size, wearing a 3-piece suit, well-shaved with freshly cut hair. He seemed pretty angry, but nothing unusual. It was 4 a.m. on a Saturday. Something in me just flipped. Every single cell of my body screamed that he was dangerous, and I was terrified. I am 1.75 meters tall and weigh 150 kilograms. I'm usually the kind of person who might make someone uncomfortable with my large beard. My hands were shaking and a voice in my head shouted, "Don't let this man come near you or stay in the hotel at all. Make him leave now." The man was angry. He told me his wife had thrown him out, that he had nowhere to go, and that he was very drunk. My brain just said, if you let him in, he will either harm himself in the room or set everything on fire. I managed to discourage him from insisting on staying, but he refused my suggestion to call the police for help that night, and I didn't push it. I feel a little bad that he left in that state, but this was the first time I felt sheer terror at the sight of someone. It was completely unexplainable. Story 31. Years ago, my buddy and one of his friends were out in the boonies, setting off fireworks for the 4th of July. We went out to the cars to light the stick we used to ignite them. While my buddy's friend was in the car doing that, I looked up at the sky, completely unused to seeing so many stars. As I stood there, something just felt off. I kept scanning the sky, trying to figure out why. Then I finally pinpointed it. I started squinting, looking away and back again, doing everything I could think of to make sure I was really seeing what I thought I was seeing. It was one point of light, absolutely identical to the stars around it, except for one strange thing. It was moving in a steady, repeating figure 8. I turned to my buddy to ask about it, and I saw him staring at the same patch of sky. So I asked, "Do you see what I see?" I hadn't said a single word about what I was looking at, but he immediately replied, "A star doing a figure 8? I've tried to explain it logically over the years, but nothing quite fits. And while I'm open to possibilities, I refuse to believe that a figure 8 in space is just the alien teenager version of doing donuts in a parking lot. Story 32. I was out with some friends at a local bar and got properly sauced. Instead of going home, I decided to drive to Jack in the Box for some food. I made it through the line and was heading back when, about 2 blocks away, I got pulled over. I was hammered. The moment the lights hit my car, a gut-wrenching sense of reality hit me. I immediately thought about how upset my dad was going to be, both angry and disappointed. I pulled over and the cop stopped behind me. I turned on the dome light and started digging for my insurance, but I was too drunk to find it. He didn't even ask for my license or registration. His first words were, "Have we been boozing tonight?" In my drunken, self-disappointed state, I immediately admitted, "Yeah, I've been boozing." He asked where I was headed, and I told him literally a straight shot 2 blocks to my driveway. "You've been swerving all over the damn road," he said. "Yes, sir," I replied. He shook his head. "Pretty freaking stupid," he said, clearly pissed. Then he made me promise never to do it again, and when I did, he finally told me to go home. The mix of confusion, relief, and guilt I felt was overwhelming. I often think that him letting me go may have had an even bigger impact on me than if I had gotten a DUI. I have never driven drunk since and never will. It really is, as he said, pretty freaking stupid. I imagine he probably had a more serious call that night, and some might say he didn't do his job. But for me, that night is etched into memory. The brief glimpse of upsetting my family and landing in legal trouble, and then having it not happen, made me never want to risk it again. Driving drunk is stupid, and it's incredibly easy to avoid. Story 33. My truck was completely locked up. I couldn't turn the steering wheel, press the brake or accelerator, change gears, roll down the windows, lock or unlock the doors, pull the emergency brake, or even change the radio station. Nothing. I was trapped in a vehicle that could only be stopped by crashing, and crash it did. I was stuck going 55 miles per hour, with the steering wheel locked at about a 35-degree angle the entire time. I hit a curb at full speed and the truck flew straight into a wall. It actually came off the ground before slamming back down. Once the truck crashed, I was finally able to unlock the door, and witnesses helped pull me out. Nobody believed my explanation. People assumed I must have been depressed, had a medical emergency, or was intoxicated because I hadn't made any visible attempt to stop the crash. But I passed the field sobriety test and a quick medical assessment by the EMTs. The police thought maybe I'd been distracted by my phone, but it was in my gym bag behind the seat. To this day, nobody believes me that my truck spontaneously locked up, especially since it hasn't happened again in the last 3 years. I've been thinking about this incident all night, and I realized it wasn't the first Ford vehicle my family has owned with a similar problem. My dad had a 2000 Ford F-150, and the steering column would constantly lock up with the key stuck in the ignition once the truck was turned off. We had to do this weird little routine, jiggling the gear shift, tapping the pedals or something like that to get it to unlock. My mom had a 2004 Ford Expedition, which was built on the F-150 platform, and it had the exact same problem. And what do all 3 Ford vehicles have in common? F-150. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.